The newest thing with AI being in the picture now, you used to identify the skills you have, the skills you need, and close the gap. And now I think it needs to start with what's the work? What's the work that needs to be done? And should this work be done by a machine, by a human?
Welcome to I'm Telling HR, the go-to podcast for ambitious HR professionals who want to shake up the status quo, make a real impact, and fast-track their careers. Brought to you by Rippling. I'm your host, Leighton Martin, HR business partner, and I'm here with Tanya Moore, Chief People Officer at West Monroe, a digital services firm that blends consulting and technology to help organizations accelerate transformation. Tanya brings over 2 decades of HR leadership experience and is a recognized expert in guiding organizations through rapid growth, large-scale transformation, and cultural evolution. She's led through complex change initiatives across industries, knows exactly what it takes to build resilient, people-first organizations. So today she joins us to discuss strategies for building a skill-based workforce, leveraging technology to personalize the employee experience, and the evolving role of HR. So Tanya, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Leighton. I'm excited to be here with you.
Super excited to chat today. I know we have some meaty topics to discuss. So before we dive in, I guess, can you tell us a little bit about your background and what first sparked your interest in HR?
I got my MBA from William & Mary, ultimately joined PricewaterhouseCoopers that became IBM as a consultant in change management. Did that for about 10 years. There was a point in my career where IBM was going through a huge transformation. I had just come off a wonderfully rewarding project with one of our US intelligence agencies, but it was also very just mentally, emotionally draining. And, so I was at the point of, maybe I should look to do something else. And my mentor, who I just am so grateful for to this day, said, well, have you considered HR? And I kind of gave her this face and I was like, Why would I do that?
Right?
And
exactly.
She gave me that face like a dog will give you. Like she cocked her head and was like, And she said, Tanya, what would you say if one of your mentees said that to you? I said, I would tell them to have an open mind. And she was like, exactly. And so I thought, let's give it a shot. And I haven't looked back since.
I love that. I feel like that's very relatable to so many people, how they pivoted into HR. So you wrote the book on strategic workforce planning. How has your perspective evolved as AI has entered the conversation? What's really shifted for you and how you think about planning for the future of work?
So what I will share is I definitely wrote a chapter of a book.
Listen, take the credit.
But I do think that when you think about, the book is called Best Practices and Emerging Directions. And it was really a nice compilation that the authors put together of thought leaders in different parts of strategic workforce planning. And mine really was kind of writing about the practitioner and the practitioner's guide to doing this work. And it was based on years and years of doing it, not only with IBM for our global workforce, but also doing it with clients. And so that really did help me to understand that everybody needs to move towards a skills-based organization. We have to do workforce planning with skills in mind, not just how many people do you have and, how many dollars do those people need to produce? So a very, very different and still very modern approach to strategic workforce planning. It was interesting, though, to get to your question. I would say it was probably 6 months after that book came out, and we were getting such good feedback from the book. But I felt like there was something that had shifted in my chapter. I felt like there was more, and I couldn't quite put my finger on it. And as a result of one thing that I am just a big believer in is that we all have to always be learning. And so as a result of really kind of continuing to stay up to date with what's going on, where things are shifting, how we need to move, the newest thing with AI being in the picture now is that, you used to identify the skills you have, the skills you need, and close the gap. And now I think it needs to start with what's the work? What's the work that needs to be done? And should this work be done by a machine, by a human? And then you can also get into the intricacies. If it's a human, is it onshore? Is it nearshore? Do you outsource it, et cetera? But when you look at and break down the work, then you're only looking at, okay, what are the skills that you need for the pieces of work that remain for the people? And then you upskill those. And then you take a different path with the things that need to go to a machine in terms of getting that automated using AI, et cetera. So there's a step, I think, before the steps we've been talking about previously that I think candidly was missing and needs to start being incorporated.
I love that. I think you're spot on there. And that leads right into the next question, thinking about what's the work and using that as our how to frame. What should HR leaders do right now to prepare their organizations for an AI powered future? What are the steps? What do we need to be thinking about?
So I am a big believer, and some of this I think was based on seeing Diane Gearson, who's the former CHRO of IBM, do this. She really led from the front. And I say that in terms of she started to have us all think about in our own day-to-day job, what do we need to be doing differently? This is a huge opportunity for HR and people organizations to lead from the front, to play a critical role, to model this for our organizations. And I also think that we have to act now. The pace of change, the velocity of change is only getting faster. And so if we wait, we're going to fall further and further behind. So the steps, I would say they're kind of 5 key steps. The first one is you just need to get smart. You need to get out there. You need to read. You need to listen to podcasts. You need to go to webinars. Get smart on what's happening and continue to stay up to speed. The second one is to build partnerships. And some of that is partnerships in the organization. So HR can't do this alone. You got to have your IT team on the team with you. And you got to do it with the line. So you got to do it with the business, really understanding the business's needs and then understanding how, from a people and a tech perspective, you solve those needs. So that's really the second one. The third one is this concept of if you don't already have a culture of growth, learning, and agility, you've got to build that in. Because part of what people need to know, sometimes even more than a specific skill, is just to have that growth mindset, to have that open mindset that I didn't have when someone asked me if I wanted to be in HR, that really allows you to be open, to learn, to experiment, to take risks. That's really, really important just with the speed at which everything is moving. The fourth one is you got to build skills. So build those AI skills. HR teams have to do it themselves. Leadership teams have to do it. It's not enough to just build skills and everybody else. Leadership teams have to have those skills themselves. They have to be using AI tools, really modeling the way, and then having those reskilling and upskilling programs that are part of what employees are expected to do, make it a little fun so they're rewarded for it. There's some recognition. And then the fifth one is what we talked about earlier, is really reimagining work. What's the work that needs to be done? What should be done by what resource? It's hard to start there because that's daunting, but it's definitely something that we all need to do as part of this HR AI journey.
Mm-hmm. Is there anything else that you recommend in how companies can reconfigure their workforce instead of really having this reaction out of like fear or urgency that can help folks reskill as we are in this age of AI transformation?
So I think one thing that I have seen companies struggle with is just where do they start? Where do I start? And then I see some companies say, okay, we're going to start, but then it's like a big analysis that goes on about who, where, how, what specifics. And so you spend a lot of times in that analysis phase when through all of that time, you're losing time. What I have found works is to just start, right? So there are some skills, basic skills that all of us need regardless of our role. For your company, what are those skills? And start educating on those while you're doing that analysis as to who needs what and getting more specific with the business. The second thing is I see a lot of good when you do pilots. Try it with an organization. And then ultimately, you really do need a thoughtful reskilling, upskilling roadmap. Who's going to be skilled to what? Who has what skills already? How are you going to continue to grow those skills? How are you going to reward people for getting them? How does it fit into the fabric of your organization? And then that really gets to the adoption piece. One thing that has been surprising for me is the fear and kind of anxiety and that lack of psychological safety that people have around this whole AI topic. Is my job at risk? Will I lose my team if I reskill them? Will I, like, what does it look like for me personally, for my team? I continually hear that the adoption part is the biggest part. Again, back to the people. How do we get folks to understand that this is in their best interest, not necessarily even, and the company's best interest? Like, it's really a win-win for all. So that there's some things I think you could get started on now. And then there are some things that I think you need to be more strategic with in regard to a roadmap. And that's a lot of times where business partners can really help. We'll come in, other companies like us will come in and help you to kind of map that out and give you a bit of a jump start on some of the areas where you can get some quick wins.
To your point again, many times you can have that analysis paralysis and it's, let's just get started, then can kind of figure out the roadmap and more of those strategic items down the line.
One of the things that I kind of feel is part of HR's job is to make people employable, not just employed. So our job is to give people the skills, the capability, the agility that they can find another position in our company, or they can go someplace else and find another position. And so to me, if we do that, we're investing in our teams that it's truly goodness for them. And at the same time, goodness for us. So that's just a little phrase that I use with my teams, if it's helpful.
Super helpful. And of course, I want folks to stay at Rippling, but it's also how are we preparing you to be building these skills to be successful elsewhere too? And what have you run into in terms of like the biggest resistance that you've ever seen from leaders about any type of like AI transformation in the workforce?
I would say the biggest one that I see as I work with clients in our organization is just protectionism. It's protection of the past, it's protection of their team, it's protection of the people, it's protection against change. That's really kind of the biggest. From an organizational component, underestimating the impact that this all has on people. We talked about how this isn't a tech problem. This is a people plus process plus tech. Again, how do we crack that code? How do we provide that communication, the transparency, the psychological safety to allow people to lean in and want to have a growth mindset, to want to try something, to feel comfortable? I think that's the other thing that comes to mind for me.
It does so much come down to, right? Are we fostering that environment where folks do have that growth mindset and feel like they can lean into that? What's your playbook for getting buy-in from leadership? How do you approach that?
If I were to kind of think about generally, the first one is when you are in an HR people function, you have to know the business. Know what the company does, know what it sells, know what that group does, know what their market is, know how they make money, know what they're struggling with, know what your leaders' metrics are, really understand what does this person or these people care about. And then speak with them on topics that they care about, in language that they use, because then you're really coming at it from a perspective of care, of knowledge. Another thing that I've seen work, I say, think big, start small. You kind of have to have a vision, right? But you got to start somewhere. And so this concept of pilots, this concept of small wins, I have found it successful in a couple different ways. One, there are people in the organization that just naturally lean in on things like this. Go where there's energy is what I tell people. Go where there's someone that's excited. Go with someone that wants to partner with you and test and learn, who's going to be a good partner. That could then, as you're showing success, highlight to the rest of the organization. And you tend to find that other leaders have fear of missing out and so will want to get on board with you. The other thing is go where there's a big pain point and how can you just kind of chip away at that pain point. And then the last one is to co-create with the business. Again, if you're doing something strictly from here comes HR, a lot of times that's just not super successful. So getting in, really understanding who's impacted, bring them in from the start. You're going to get to better solutions. You're building buy-in as you go. Those are kind of three of my biggest tips.
So if our listeners could do just one thing today to start learning about transformational change, obviously in this context of AI and HR, what would you recommend?
I don't even know that I'd recommend a specific skill. I would recommend really understanding and building a growth mindset, building that agility, being open to asking questions, being open to being curious. Because I really believe that if people have that at the core of their being, the rest will start to come naturally.
Incredible. Well, thank you, Tanya, so much for joining us today. I really enjoyed this conversation.
Thanks for having me.
And thanks for tuning in to I'm Telling HR. I am your host, Leighton Martin. This episode of I'm Telling HR was brought to you by Rippling. If you want more sharp takes or tactical insights like this, hit the link in the show notes and subscribe to our newsletter where thousands of HR pros go to stay one step ahead.